Hello and welcome to the Scottish Football Show. Oh, it's a good one coming up. The most beautiful of nil-nils. Yes, Scotland, we are promoted to League A of the UEFA Nations League. We've got a playoff place for the Euros and we'll be in pot 2 for Euro 2024 qualifiers thanks to a cracking point in Krakow. We check in at Partick Thistle where off the pitch matters seem a little bit chaotic, so we hear from the Jags Foundation who tell us what the hell is going on. But on the pitch, it's also not so great. They lost 2-0 to Falkirk in the Challenge Cup, and we're going to delve a little bit deeper into what went on in that competition as some smaller sides look for some cup glory this season. Yes, hello, welcome back. I'm Andrew Slaven. Joining me on this show, West Ham United senior producer and devoted Tartan Army foot soldier, Laura Brannan.
Hello.
Hello. And we've got a very familiar voice back joining with us again, editor and filmmaker Findlay Marks, who has survived his travels, 24-hour journeys, plane, trains and automobiles. Finn, how are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Really good to be back. Yeah, it was really weird being back in the UK and actually having less on a handle of what was going on in the world of football than when I do when I'm back home in Melbourne. So yeah, it's good to be back on.
Look, I suppose I know Finn, you probably haven't seen too much, especially with your jet lag. But Laura, we can kick things off with a few interesting tidbits that have happened in the last couple of days. But I'll let you go first, mate.
One of the things I've noticed over the last few days was how difficult it is to watch the Scotland game in London.
I can testify to that, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously me and you, Andrew, we're now based in London. I'd been back home for the first 2 home games. Unfortunately, I wasn't getting to go to Poland. So I thought, right, okay, go out in London, let's see where we can get to. Just couldn't get in contact with anyone else who was based here from Tartan Armies. Couldn't find a pub that was showing the game with commentary. I'm a right stickler for it. See, if I'm in a pub, there has to be commentary.
Oh yeah.
And the last thing you want is to turn up at a pub and it's silent because other people are watching something else or music's playing. Nah, not interested in that.
I suppose one thing we should really do to anyone who's listening and who may live in London, we should do our own one, Laura.
Yeah.
We should get as many Tartan Army loyalists we can get our hands on, and we'll parade ourselves down to a pub. We'll pick somewhere. We'll just go there every time there's a Scotland game and we'll tell the pub and they can put on half-time pies. Scotch pies.
Scotch pies.
And,
has to be a Scotch pie.
Yeah, it has to be a Scotch pie. I think this could be a very interesting thing for us in London.
Yeah, come and join the London Tartan Army.
Just kind of staying with international football, I love the story of Clyde's Josh Bradley-Hurst getting called up to the Sri Lanka training camp for their fixtures that are coming up in October. And if he plays, is it right? It's their first cap in 55 years, the first Clyde player to win a cap since 1967. So I think that's fantastic.
That's pretty cool, right? Yeah, really cool. I actually know who the player is. The last player that got that cap for Clyde. Do you guys know?
Would it have been? I mean, not that I'm hugely on the ball with Scotland caps from the 1950s and 60s, but I do remember anybody that grew up listening to Off the Ball remembers the amount of times they mentioned Tommy Ring, who always got into the team of the week somehow, and I think he got a dozen caps or so, and also the brilliantly named Harry Haddock as well. I remember played for Clyde in Scotland, but I don't know who the last person would have been.
You're quite close with Harry Haddock. It's actually Harry Hood.
Harry Hood?
Harry Hood, remember, ex-Celtic and actually ex-Queen of the South as well. And oddly, I believe, do you know what, I might be wrong, but he actually was awarded this cap for, it was like a summer camp series that Scotland went out and played in America or something like that. But yeah, bit of an odd one, and then he got it quite late as the SFA decided to recognise those games as official caps. A bizarre one, but there you go.
One of the best Scottish international history. They have been promoted to Nations League A. They've also just guaranteed themselves a playoff place for Euro 2024. The Scotland supporters celebrate wildly because this is a massive result. It feels like a 0-0 win. A fabulous night. Ends Ukraine 0, Scotland 0.
Scotland have done it. They have won their Nations League and are promoted into League A, which, might I add, England have been relegated out of. Just let that sink in for a wee second. It's been a huge couple of weeks for Steve Clarke and his players. Victory at Hampden in the first two games against Ukraine, then Ireland. They were a must and were achieved. But despite those recent achievements and improvements under Steve Clarke, Tuesday night was still, it felt like we wouldn't get the rub of the green after all these, bits of fortune that have fallen our way, but it's finally coming our way, and a 0-0 draw against Ukraine was enough to secure a place in pot 2 of Euro 2024, and it feels so good, guys. I mean, Finn, Laura, I don't care who jumps in right now, just fill me with further joy.
How good was that? Oh, what an international break it has been. 2 glorious home wins and the most tensest, nerve-wracking, goalless draw that meant so much in the end. What a team we have. What a squad we've got just now. This is by far the best squad that I have seen in my lifetime, and I am loving every second of this. It is a glorious time to be a Scotland fan.
Yeah, Finn, this is a great team. I mean, it's definitely, I'm with Laura 100%. I've never seen a team achieve so much and bring me so much happiness. And we've had some great players in the past, but I mean, does it fall down to just a great crop of players or to Steve Clarke, who's a very good manager?
He is a very good manager. I think it was interesting you watching it because you look at the starting lineup tonight, and I think we were all sending messages around each other, being like, "Oh, really?"
I think the gifs an hour before kickoff when we all saw. I think particularly that back line more than anything, we were like, "Oh."
But to be absolutely fair, I think we've had reservations on some of the players when they've come in because they're not that experienced at this level, but you have to say, like, there were some huge performances in there tonight, and we were missing, obviously, some of our best players, like our truly world class players, Robertson, Tierney, McTominay, Patterson. None of them were in the team tonight, and we did have to really dig deep. But I thought, I thought Hickey was absolutely brilliant tonight, and it's one of the best games I've seen Porteous play in a long time for a club or country. So it was really good, but that's what you need at this level. I think for so long we've gone through phases where we've had good starting 11s. And we've had some brilliant players, and I would say, pushing on a world-class level, the likes of Darren Fletcher and players like that, players that have played at the elite end of the game, winning the biggest competitions. But I don't think we've had that strength in depth before, and it's trying to find that blend, which I don't think many other Scotland managers before Steve Clarke have been able to find, which is trying to juxtapose the players that are at the next level, who do compete, like Robertson, Tierney, whatever, McGinn in the Premier League, or playing abroad, like Jack Hendry or Aaron Hickey, and trying to marry that up with still very good players, but maybe players that play domestically that aren't quite at that level. So like Stephen O'Donnell, we finished the game with Stephen Kingsley on the pitch tonight, which was brilliant, because you kind of... you trust them all coming in now. I think that's the thing. Steve Clarke's done this job over the last couple of years, which is really trying to essentially establish a club mentality.
Yeah, of course.
Which I think at times has been really good, because it's helped to ground the players and really build that dressing room atmosphere. And you can see that on the pitch. Players don't feel precious about their place, and when they get the chance to come in, they'll play really hard for it. I think at times that might have limitations at other sides. I'm sure we'll come on to that in a little bit. But yeah, for the most part, it's brilliant to see. And sometimes it's a little bit seat of the pants, a little bit skin of teeth, but we're getting the results on the pitch more often than not, and that's the most encouraging thing to me.
What you're saying there is, like, some of it's not pretty, and it doesn't have to be. Now, see if we have to grind out a 0-0 and it is back to the wall, we've parked the bus at 60 minutes. I don't care. If we pull off the result and we get what we need, I don't care how ugly we play. But when you're looking at the depth of this team, and you were talking about there, Finn, I think you're spot on. If you'd told me that we were going to finish this international break playing the likes of Ralston, Kingsley, Taylor, Porteous, Hickey, even McLean and Jack, even Fraser, these are not your first team go-to Scotland players. And essentially this, I mean, at some points now I was thinking this is actually more like a kind of a Premiership All-Star 11 more than an actual Scotland side, because that isn't your go-to superstars that we've been playing in the last kind of few rounds of games. It's not your Robertsons, McTominays, Tierneys, etc, etc. And to have that depth and to play who we're calling a second string Scotland team, and to still go out there and be outstanding enough to get the points that matter. I mean, look at that Porteous tackle at the end. That was an incredible move. What a moment for a boy that's making his debut to go out there at a crunch part of the game when we could have easily conceded and that would have been it all over. And he had the balls to go out there and make a challenge like that in such a dangerous area. That takes guts, and that's brilliant.
Let's talk about Porteous, because Finn, you mentioned that, you know, there's a level of we trust these players that are coming in now, your Kingsleys and whatnot. There was a lot of people calling for that when a bout of illness was going through the team. And might I add, in Steve Clarke's post-match comments, he admitted that Jack Hendry played tonight with a cold. You know, I mean, to Scottish people, a cold's nothing, right? But when you're playing in a massive game, that's absolutely huge in fair play. But Ryan Porteous, his inclusion ahead of this game, it kind of angered a lot of people. People were nervous and maybe annoyed that he was looked ahead of others. But what, Laura, you said it yourself, what an outstanding performance. When you look into some of the stats that this guy has achieved, he was in this match: first in accurate passes, second in duels won, second in possession wins, first in interceptions, first in tackles. You can't get better a debut than that, other than being first in duels or second, first in possession wins. But you look at the weight of pressure that would be on a player like that, and he is that type of character which will scrub all that away and just focus at his job in hand. And I think he's obviously that type of player that when he's in your team, you absolutely love the boy. But when he's out it, you probably despise him. And let's just say, big on old Porto. I'm well for him. What a, you know, everyone was calling for Declan Gallagher, Laura, but with Porteous now in that performance, he's a shoo-in to be part of this squad.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's also another reason why I trust Steve Clarke so much.
He's a very good manager.
Because no matter how many times he frustrates the hell out of me with his selections, and I will go into games be like, that's not the right team, shouldn't put him in, why are you not making subs sooner, that's the wrong sub to make, and I can be calling him every name under the sun, but at the end of the day he proves me wrong every single time, and that is why he is a Scotland manager and I'm nowhere near that dugout because I have full trust in him, absolutely full trust in him. I
also love the way he deals with the media. You know, he plays his cards close to his chest, and then when everything's been said and done, and at the end of a campaign, he releases like that kind of emotion that you just end up falling in love with him a little bit more. You know, he said we had the European Championship where we got to the last game and came up short. We've done it again and taken this campaign to the last game. We've asked our players to take the next step because then we'll feel good about ourselves. And this was all about off the back of the disappointment in the summer and that defeat against Ukraine, which meant we couldn't qualify for the World Cup. And he said as well, in terms of moving on from the summer camp, he sat down with the whole staff, said we have to set a different environment and demand more of the players. And that's it, Finn. I mean, the thing is, he's demanded so much of these players and they've answered. He even said Ryan Porteous coming in at late notice, he's shown that he listens and he learns, and he's bringing that out of these players as well, because they all want to do well.
It's such a good point to make. Just briefly going back to Porteous, because I think it is worth highlighting his performance. It was such an outstanding debut, but I think the thing is, like, if you watch Porteous week to week, you know that's there. Like, he's a really accomplished, good centre back. It's just, I think, the potentially sometimes negative parts to his game get highlighted more than not, because they can be quite noticeable. I think if he kind of loses the head, or
he's always in the ref's ear at every possible moment.
Yeah, which can be a good thing, and I think that's why it worked tonight, and it's good having the option to go between, I think probably two centre backs of very similar ability. I think, well, actually Porteous is probably slightly better than Gallagher, but Gallagher, I think, is that very steady, kind of level, no nonsense kind of thing. I think Porteous, because he's got that little bit of bite to him, that little bit of spark, and I think we needed that against that Ukrainian fight and metal that they had up front. So it was that. And obviously it's been proved right by the result, the clean sheet and everything, and his individual performance. So I think that was amazing. But just to come back to the other point about Steve Clarke, yeah, I think that's the mark of a good manager, is somebody who's able to learn, and you can see discernible progress. I think there have been points where I've been a bit frustrated at the way I've seen Clarke not look to be learning from certain experiences. I think a really good microcosm of that is the fact that Scotland have played about 300,000 games against Israel in the last couple of years. Clarke's had 4 matches against Israel. He's only won one of them, and that was the most recent one, the 3-2 game. But in those games, I'd be like, we know exactly how they're going to set up, we know exactly how they're going to play, and it never looked like we learned from it. But in a much wider context, it is about that progress and that discernible look where we are now compared to 6 months ago or a year ago. And I think it's those baby steps, it's that incremental thing, because how often have we been here where, Scotland can be such a confidence team. We put a good run together. I think there was about a year that we were undefeated recently, and that culminates with the amazing home win and performance against Denmark, which I think is the standout performance of Clarke's time in charge. And then we get that bit of an unfortunate break going into the playoff against Ukraine, where it just everything looked like it had reverted back to type, and we've got such scar tissue as Scotland fans, just being like, well, of course it's going to go back to this because this is just what we do. But the real mark of him as a manager and the management team and this group of players is that ability to bounce back, because you look at those results in the summer, and the Ukraine one, I mean, there was so much weird stuff going on round about it.
Of course,
I'd made this film for FIFA at the time, which should be coming out soon, that kind of documented the whole thing. And it was just this weird atmosphere, this weird vibe the whole time. And then it just looked like this massive hangover going into the game in Dublin, where we were just atrocious, like second best on every level. So to take the pause there, to be able to reassess and be like, nah, we need to make a mental break here and a mental change. How do we do that? And they've obviously done it, because you look at the back end of this campaign, to take 7 points against Ukraine and Ireland over those 3 games is fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic, and we fully deserve to be where we are and reaping the benefits of taking the Nations League seriously and playing as well as we have done.
Absolutely, I think you've nailed it. You talk about Clarke, making his mark in his history as Scotland manager, and this turnaround from the summer seems to be it. This is the moment I think a lot of Scotland fans will remember. But staying on Clarke, who's, I've said before, a very good manager, on being promoted to League A, he did respond to say that will be the next head coach's job, because his contract is up by then, when the next cycle of the Nations League comes along. So, Laura, if you are the head of the SFA, are you not inviting him round for a lovely ribeye steak and putting a nice fat contract on the table?
I am knocking on his door right this minute.
Or is he vegetarian? Maybe it'll go the wrong way.
Like, see, getting promoted to League A, out of the three things that's happened from this result, I would say promotion to League A is actually the smallest. It's sexy, but it's not important enough.
So
the biggest
sexy.
thing for me, is the fact that we are now 2 games from Germany in Euro 2024, and this is such a big tournament for us to get to. We couldn't get to the Euros in 2020 because of COVID. It was rubbish. We couldn't get to Qatar because, it's far too expensive even if we did qualify. It is Euro 2024 is the one to get to in the country of football, which has, the best beers, the best sausages, the best transport system. We're 2 games away from that. And then, on top of that, we are second seeds for the actual qualifiers, which just means that we could have an absolute dream group. Look, I'm not going to get ahead of myself here because that's still like 10 odd games in that qualifying round, but we have made it so much easier for ourselves. We have put ourselves in the best possible position for 2 summers' time to be the greatest summer of our lifetimes. And then on top of that, we've got League A to look forward to. And I can't see England anywhere, can you?
No, it's quite funny, isn't it? It's quite nice to look down on them for once.
But we'll wave as we pass them by.
I know.
Like passing ships in the night.
There was also a great tweet from Pine Bovril on Tuesday night which said Craig Gordon could save the pound. Considering it's in free
He
fall.
saves tonight. Unbelievable saves as usual.
Good,
honestly.
so good. But Laura, you're right. COVID was rubbish. Nobody really got to enjoy that. But let's talk about the pots that we could get in the qualifiers, because the Euro qualifiers actually will be happening on the 9th of October. And you look at some of the teams that we will actually miss. The first one to pick out in pot 2 is the world champions, France, who obviously, when the qualifying happens, may not be world champions, but we won't have to play them. Czech Republic, we won't have to face England, who we would beat anyway. Wales, who are probably our bogey team. Israel, we don't have to play Israel again, guys.
Yeah. Although in saying that, just hold on a second, in saying that, when it comes to the playoffs, Israel and Serbia are both in the playoffs. So we could actually replicate 2020 all over again and do it with fans this time.
I would rather not have to take the playoff route. I'd rather just qualify as one of the top 2 teams straight away from the main
obviously,
qualifying
yeah,
section.
of course, but I actually am not against playing Israel because we actually did all right against them, and the last game against them was probably my favourite game ever at Hampden. So I'm not got bad memories of playing Israel. I'm quite happy to take them on again.
I don't know. I think you have a short memory. Israel weren't exactly that bad against us, but I'm with Finn.
We beat them on penalties. We beat them in the 3-2 game. That is all that matters to me. I'm happy.
Oh mate, honestly, I'm with Finn. I don't think we'll need the playoffs. I think we can finish top if we get a favourable group, because we could always pull out Spain. Then we could pull out someone like Georgia or Turkey. Then finish off with I don't know, the rest. Slovakia wouldn't be great. But then Andorra, San Marino, Liechtenstein. We wouldn't lose to them, would we?
The flip side of we could potentially get a draw. It wouldn't be very Scotland, but we could potentially get a group of Hungary, Armenia, Faroe Islands and Gibraltar. I would take that.
Good night out, Gibraltar.
Yeah.
Good night out. Lots of monkeys as well, up the big rock. They like to steal your clothing. So don't head up there if you're in the early hours.
Stevie May! Bedlam! Chaos! Euphoria in the away stand! Blue limbs everywhere!
Okay, there was still some domestic games at the weekend in the shape of the Challenge Cup. 14 third-round games took place over the weekend, with 2 still to be played in November. Very strange, but we have been probably having too much to drink in the build-up to the Ireland game. But one man who has been giving his full attention was journalist Euan Booth Robertson. Hello, Euan. How you doing?
How you doing? One journalist who doesn't drink as well. You should nearly put in there as well.
Very good, man. Very good. Partick Thistle fan as well, I don't believe you. Yes, Euan, talk to me about what went down at the weekend, domestically.
A lot, quite a lot went down. I don't know how many people are that interested in this tournament, but yeah, there was loads happening. You know, there's lots of goals, lots of games. Disappointment from our club, obviously, we'll probably go on to that. There's some quite cool storylines, I thought. Anyway, I mean, so you got TNS and Linfield, so two of the, you know, shall we say, foreign clubs to enter this competition. Now they both played in the Champions League this season, and in the qualifying stages, and one of them in Linfield got taken to the wire by Highland League side Partick Thistle. So, you know, from the Champions League to the Highland League for Linfield this season, they obviously scraped a 2-1 win against Bucky. And obviously TNS from Wales, who the other Champions League participants in the early stages this season, they get pumped 3-0 at home to Dundee, so a mid-table championship side. I'm obviously joking a little bit there towards Dundee. But yeah, I mean, it's great. You know, Declan McManus of many clubs in Scotland, the journeyman striker at, I think he's maybe 25, 26. He was obviously playing for TNS there, but that was probably the standout result, wasn't it? I mean, for me, certainly, you know, you got like a championship club beating the team at the top of the Welsh league. So how seriously I think some of the Welsh and Irish teams take the competition, I'm not too sure. That result probably alludes to that. You know, getting beat 3-0 at home to Dundee. So yeah, but I mean, it's an interesting tournament.
It's quite good fun having these clubs involved, though, right? Like, because it's not been this hasn't been a regular thing, or it has now been for a couple of years. It does make it interesting.
It's not fun. It's not fun at all, man.
What are you on about? Of course it is. It spices things up a little bit.
Oh, it really spices things up to bring in 2 teams from Wales and 2 teams from Northern Ireland to play the small teams in Scotland. That's a really tasty tournament, isn't it? Come on.
That's very nice of you to say small teams in Scotland. It's, you know.
It's ridiculous. It's never worked. Come on, when has it ever worked?
But Laura, if you're a supporter of one of these teams, maybe from Ireland or Wales, it could be the only chance you've got of a really fun away day that's slightly different from the norm and everything. Is that something as
forget the teams in Ireland and Wales getting an away day. See, for like a fan of a club that Laura's just described as small.
Okay, I'm going to take that part back.
No, I'm only joking. But I mean, for me, I mean, the chance to get an away day will literally be probably the only time in my lifetime I'll ever get to watch Thistle outside of Scotland. Do you know what I'd actually quite like to do? This is if Neil Doncaster or Murdo McLaren's listening to this. I'm sure they've got nothing to keep them busy apart from that.
They're definitely not.
I think the teams from Wales and Ireland should be made to play at least the first round at home to give these Scottish clubs a chance of an away trip. Because I can imagine if Thistle went to Ireland, for example, you know, I reckon we take over 1,000 fans there just because of the novelty of it. So I think that's probably the only positive of these teams being in the tournament, if I'm being brutally honest. You know, like Laura said, I don't think they take it that seriously.
Surely it's not fair, though, that they enter in the 3rd round of the competition. Why did they get a bye of 2 rounds and the Scottish teams don't?
Yeah, I mean, Scottish cup competitions and teams getting byes. You know, in the League Cup, you only have to win 4 games to win it. So that's another pet peeve of mine, but maybe something for another day. You know, it's like you're 2 games away from Hampden. You know, what an achievement. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting tournament. They've tried to be quirky with it. I'm all for innovation. Does it work? You know, the jury's certainly out on that one.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, other matches of note: Wraith Rovers, the holders, they're through after beating Cove Rangers, and of course Clyde. I can't pronounce the team that they beat.
Carnarvon.
Yeah, that sounds awfully close. Just on that game, by the way, we're talking about the away trip and that. They brought quite a contingent over to play at Hamilton. That's obviously where Clyde play for the moment. But it was brilliant. I don't know if you've seen it. Their bus was travelling through what must have been Hamilton city centre, and there was flares going up either side of the road. It was, you know, the bus driver couldn't see. I was like, see, for those fans, it must have been absolutely class to travel all that way to watch our side have 0 shots on target and lose to last minute goal. so fair play.
That's class. Yeah.
What do they call it? The magic of the cup.
You're kind of selling it to me now.
Interesting about Thistle this weekend. Partick Thistle losing to Falkirk, but a very familiar surname in Scottish football, Gallagher Lennon. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a big name because of his dad's obviously Neil Lennon, and yeah, I think he's got a chance of making his first team debut this season. It probably would have been in this cup if I'm honest. So maybe now that chance is gone. But yeah, I heard Ian McCall speaking in the week, and he said he's going to have to protect him because obviously there's going to be a huge spotlight on him. It's Neil Lennon, who's probably one of the most iconic figures in the last 20 years of Scottish football, or certainly the most recognisable. So yeah, I think he's got a chance of getting in the first team like his dad. He's got those lovely ginger locks.
I love how you pick out his hair before his footballing ability.
Because I've never watched him play.
fair assessment.
But you know, there's some still good championship clubs in it. Obviously, Inverness were in a kind of 6-goal thriller against Beacon City. Managed to get through that in penalties. Dundee, as we mentioned, beat the new Saints. Rafe Rovers last year's the holders are still in the tournament as well. So it'll be interesting to see as you go along. Obviously, the kind of 2 old firm teams are still to kind of play their games in this round.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because they were involved. Some of the young players were involved in Euro qualifying for under 21s and stuff like that, wasn't it? So yeah, Rangers B are playing Hamilton in November, and Dunfermline are at home to Celtic B. Interesting.
Can't be having that, mate. You better get your finger out alright and make sure that you get the results.
Partick Thistle have made an excellent return to the Scottish Championship, joint top of the table after 7 games, and you would think all things were fairly rosy in Maryhill, but off the field, the ownership of the club has been fairly chaotic after the death of Euromillions winner Colin Weir. His company, Three Black Cats, held 55% of shares, and that was recently transferred to PTFC Trust ahead of the Jags Foundation, which has created some acrimony between fans and the club. So here to explain just how this situation has came around, I'm delighted to say we've been joined by Ian Mackinnon, who is the Events and Communications Lead for the Jags Foundation. So Ian, give me some background and just tell me how we've got to this situation.
Yeah, sure. So the Jags Foundation was set up in 2019. It started off simply as the working group, and it was set up after Colin Weir bought a 55% stake in the club, which he always said he wanted to give to the fans. So I think it was the club. It was ultimately the club that set up the Jags Foundation, but let the fans kind of run with it. Members were all paying £10 a month or £5 a month towards it, with the ultimate aim of it being a fundraising vehicle, like they've got at St Mirren, like they've got at Hearts, like they've got at Morton now, as well, and Motherwell. And so, yes, and so the initial board started negotiating with Three Black Cats, who are basically Jackie Lowe and MBM Nominees Limited, who basically represent Colin Weir's estate. Unfortunately, Colin passed away not long after he bought the controlling share in the club, which did delay things, definitely. But before he did die, I mean, he did say in his initial statement that he wanted to emulate the Motherwell model. That was mentioned. So that was basically the starting point for the Jags Foundation. Now, this could have been done in months. Initially, the target was March 2020. Now, obviously, Colin dying understandably delayed things, and then obviously we had a pandemic. But as time went on, we started not hearing much about it, and things just weren't happening. There was no real updates from the foundation or Three Black Cats. Things eventually came to a head in March, April this year, when Three Black Cats suddenly released a statement saying that the Jags Foundation would no longer be getting the shareholding, and that there was another note of interest. Now, that could have easily been the end of the Jags Foundation at that point, but a group of us got together and decided that we didn't want it to be the end, and we basically asked the outgoing board, because when this all happened, the board at the time resigned en masse, every single one of them. So we said, look, hold the election. A few of us will stand. Let's see who else wants to stand. So I think we had about 13 candidates for 9 seats. All of us in our group, there was 7 of us who stood under the kind of common manifesto. for Jags for Change, and luckily all 7 of us got elected. And so there was a total board of 9. Now, at that point, we approached 3 Black Cats and said, can we restart negotiations? Totally fresh start. And they agreed to that. And the first meeting went kind of okay. There was a face-to-face meeting. Then, as soon as we brought up the question of due diligence, that we were told that wasn't happening. So I think they expected us to kind of pull out at that point, because that's what what brought the house down last time. But we said, no, look, let's stick in the game here. Let's see what kind of deal we can bring back to the members, because ultimately we were elected by the members, so we didn't feel that we had the right to pull out of negotiations without consulting the members and without at least trying to get a deal to the table. They just kept putting more kind of roadblocks in the way, and eventually it became apparent at the last meeting that they were going with another interested party. It was the PTFC Trust, who had basically been set up long before the Jags Foundation in 2015, and that was to manage an initial stake that Colin Weir bought in the club, which was about 19%. They'd been pretty much dormant since then. They hadn't really done anything. All season ticket holders of 3 years or more were meant to be beneficiaries of the trust, but ultimately in 2019, it was decided that the trust wasn't a suitable vehicle to receive the shares, and all of a sudden, 3 years later, it's deemed acceptable. They brought on a brand new set of trustees and replaced the old ones without any sort of consultation with the fans. And then they basically said, right, they're going to be the majority shareholder of the club. They're going to have 74%, but they're not going to have any seats on the board. So we're now in a position where we've got a group of, it was 6 trustees. Their chairman had to resign on day one, by the way, because it turned out that he'd been engaging in some pretty creepy activity with some female fans. So he had to step down on day one. So I mean, that the whole thing is, we're now in a position where we've got a group of 5 people who now control 74% of the club. The fans have been almost universally negative in terms of how they've received it. And our organisation, which has 870 members now, we've basically been told that, you know, we're not in the game anymore. So yeah, it's been quite the few months.
It's interesting because what changed then from 2019, when PTFC were deemed not the right people to take over a controlling stake, to then, well, the situation we are now?
I think it's hard to avoid the conclusion that Jackie Lowe doesn't want true fan ownership, because she feels that would leave her vulnerable. Jackie Lowe is also the chairman of the football club, as well as the only real director of the majority shareholder, which a lot of people always thought was a bit of a conflict of interest. That's the only thing I can see as why we were deemed unsuitable, because 2 different iterations of the Jags Foundation board have both been deemed unsuitable. Despite the fact that when we all got elected, all 9 of us said, listen, if you've got a problem with any one of us, and if any one of us are deemed unsuitable, then tell us now. And whoever it was, we all agreed, if she's got a problem with any of us, we'll walk away, because we don't want to be the reason that this isn't going to happen. But no objections were raised. They said she said she had no problem. Now it's kind of been thrown out as, well, you know, if you hadn't been so critical of her in the past, then maybe it would have happened. But it's not like she was giving the shares to us 9 people. We're negotiating on behalf of, as I said, 870 members who are all fans. So the answer, I don't know. We only speculate, because she won't talk. She won't talk. She won't come out and tell us what the problem was.
It's worth mentioning at this point that we did invite PTFC Trust onto the show to give their side of the story. They didn't acknowledge our message. Am I right in saying that they haven't been communicating with the fans as well?
Yeah, so there's 2 issues here with the PTFC Trust. The first issue is the trust as a legal entity is not a suitable vehicle for fan ownership. It's not a suitable vehicle to manage these shares. So if you look at the fan-owned clubs in Scotland, Hearts, Motherwell, St Mirren and now Morton, we also looked at examples in England. Exeter City is a really good example. They seem to be doing really well. Now, we couldn't find any example in the UK or even further afield of a fan-owned club that uses a trust to be the vehicle for the shares. And there's good reasons for that, because trusts don't have members, they have beneficiaries, right? The beneficiaries don't have anywhere near the legal rights that members of an organisation like the Jags Foundation do. The trustees, who are basically the equivalent of a board, the trustees can change the deed of the trust whenever they like without consulting the beneficiaries, as they've done many times already. They can swap in and out full boards, as they've done, without consulting the beneficiaries. So that's the first problem. It's not a suitable legal entity, right? The second problem is now the fact that this new set of trustees are claiming to represent the fans, but they're refusing to negotiate, and they're refusing to speak to fans. They had a couple of kind of informal things before 2 home games, and it was 3 of them sitting at a desk. And they basically, people came up and spoke to them. They basically tied themselves in knots. And I think the problem is when something's been done so dishonestly like this, it seems as if the story is changing all the time. And yeah, they're not responding to emails. We've tried to reach out to them several times. I actually know one of them. He's a friend of a friend. And he actually did reach out on the first day, and I had a good conversation with him on the phone. We didn't agree on a lot of things, but the conversation ended on good terms, and it was agreed that both organisations would look to kind of speak to each other and have dialogue. That's just not happened. So there seems to be a real bunker mentality, and the people that they claim to represent, the people that they are claiming to be doing this for, they're completely ignoring at the moment.
It's interesting because it felt very much when this story broke that it caught everyone by surprise, but it has been bubbling away for a while, as you've explained. So I was trying to wonder if there was any sympathy for PTFC in having to try and change the way the ownership is going to work between the board and the fans, and the progress of all of that, because they do say they want to change things, but it's got to fit into the way that fans want their club to go in the right direction, sort of thing. Do you think it's just a lack of planning? Do you have some hope that that might change for the better? What are your biggest concerns?
My biggest concern is that this is not fan ownership in any way, shape or form. This is not a version of fan ownership that is recognised anywhere else, certainly not in the UK, but even further afield, we can't find any example of a similar fan ownership model to this. The fans don't have anywhere near the rights that they should have under a model such as the Jags Foundation, this is the most frustrating thing. The model was already there. A lot of people put a lot of time into setting up the Jags Foundation and making it a robust organisation, making sure that the members and ultimately the fans had protections, had rights, were going to be able to have a say. To then be told that all this work is for nothing, it just doesn't add up. The trust was already there in 2019. If they wanted to use the trust as the vehicle, they could have done it then. They didn't do it then, and it's because it wasn't a suitable entity. It's not a suitable legal entity. Every time someone speaks about it, you just come away with more questions than you do answers. And it doesn't pass the smell test. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't feel right. There just doesn't seem to be any honesty about this.
What confuses me sometimes is just this idea of just the beneficiaries. Where's the benefit? What is the benefit of being a beneficiary? I don't know what the goal is really, other than what everyone should be if you're involved in a trust or a foundation, is for the betterment of your club.
Yeah, I mean, usually, the trust is trusts themselves generally, they're usually set up for kids who've inherited a lot of money, and it feels a bit in this situation like we've been treated like kids who can't be trusted to make our own decisions. I really do think it comes back to Jackie Lowe and her board not wanting to relinquish control, which should be fine if Jackie Lowe had paid for these shares with her own money, but she hasn't.
Okay, that's it from us. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Laura and Finn. Good to have you back, Finn, mate. It's lovely to see that baldy coupon of yours on Zoom. Thanks to Ian Mackinnon as well from the Jags Foundation. Hopefully we'll hear from PTFC Trust near future and they can have their say. And to Euan Booth Robertson for his never-ending lower league expertise. An absolute legend, that boy. We'll be back next Tuesday. We'll see you then.